Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Rain fell gently on the small town of Ravenswood, drawing silvery streaks on the windows of the old houses. In the family chapel, a heavy silence enveloped the dark wooden walls. Candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the faces of the gathered relatives. Emily Harper, 22, stood by the coffin of her father, Richard Harper, staring down at the motionless body. Every breath felt heavy, every heartbeat pounding in her temples like a drum signaling unseen danger. Richard had always been a pillar of strength for her, warm, protective, and even in his moments of weakness, he knew how to bring a smile to Emily's face. But now he lay there, silent, and for Emily, the silence was unbearable. Pain squeezed her chest. She leaned forward, unable to hold back the tears, and placed her hands on her father's. "Daddy. I love you. I don't know how to live without you," she whispered, her voice choked with grief. Around her, the guests tried to contain their emotion, some with red, watery eyes, others biting their lips to keep from bursting into tears. But a strange feeling hung in the air, difficult to define. As if Richard's death wasn't quite final. Emily hugged her father tighter, trying to hold on to that last breath of life she still faintly felt, an invisible thread between them. She didn't know that, a few minutes later, this gesture of love would trigger something unthinkable, something that would send shivers through the entire chapel and change their lives forever. The world of Ravenswood was about to tip into the unknown. The chapel was filled with the scent of wilted flowers and wax. The stained glass windows diffused a soft, almost unreal light that caressed the walls like a silent whisper. Emily Harper remained kneeling before her father's coffin, unable to take her eyes off the face she knew by heart. Her hands trembled as she brushed against Richard's cool skin. Every wrinkle on his face brought back childhood memories, his peals of laughter, his patient guidance, and those evenings when he held her on his lap and told her incredible stories. Life suddenly seemed empty without him. "Dad, please don't go," Emily sobbed, her voice breaking. Her hands clutched her father's as if she could hold them against death. The silence of the chapel seemed to thicken around her. Suddenly, a slight chill ran down her spine. Emily looked up and saw the candle flames flickering strangely, casting shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. She shook her head, dismissing the idea that it could be anything other than a draft. But deep down, she felt something strange, a presence that didn't belong to this world. Despite her fear, Emily tightened her embrace around her father's body. The minutes stretched, slow and heavy. Each second spent with him was a mixture of grief and intense love, a last communion before the inevitable. And then, 5 minutes later, a subtle, almost imperceptible noise broke the silence, a slight creak coming from the coffin. Emily jerked back, gasping for air. The guests froze, some looking at each other in astonishment and fear. The coffin seemed to vibrate, imperceptibly, but enough that the air itself seemed charged with an unearthly tension. It was at this precise moment that fear began to settle in the chapel, announcing that what was to follow would exceed anything they had ever imagined. The guests' murmurings turned into nervous whispers. Eyes met, hesitant, some trying to rationalize the phenomenon, others feeling an icy chill run down their spines. Emily, frozen a few steps from the coffin, felt her heart pounding. The candles still flickered, casting shadows that seemed to dance with a consciousness of their own. The walls of the chapel felt narrower, as if the air itself were compressing around the living. Emily took a deep breath, trying to calm the rising panic. "It must be the woods," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. But the cracking started again, sharper this time. A shudder ran through the assembly. Aunt Margaret, a normally stoic woman, stepped back abruptly and grabbed her husband's arm. I think something's wrong," she stammered. The priest tried to regain control of the situation. "Don't worry, my children, it's only..." His voice trailed off in a shaky breath as the coffin moved again, imperceptibly but enough to make some guests rise from their seats. Emily, despite the fear that invaded her, felt a strange impulse. She advanced slowly towards the coffin, her gaze fixed on her father. An inner voice, soft but insistent, seemed to call to her, "Emily, stay." The entire room seemed suspended in an oppressive silence, where every breath seemed deafening. Then a new noise, deeper and more sinister, echoed from the coffin, a faint but unmistakable hiss, as if someone or something inside was trying to communicate. The guests backed away, some gripping the pews for stability. Emily felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. She knew, deep down, that this moment would forever change what they thought they knew about life and death. And in the heavy silence of the chapel, a terrifying question formed in everyone's minds: what if Richard Harper wasn't really gone? The coffin shook slightly, but unevenly, as if reacting to some invisible force. Emily stepped back, gasping for breath, her hands still cold from the contact with her father's body. Her eyes widened as an unusual shadow appeared on the wood of the coffin, as if someone, or something, were moving inside. The guests murmured, some turning pale with fear. Margaret gripped her husband's arm with almost desperate strength. The pale priest raised his hands to calm the panic, but his voice trembled. "Stay calm, this must be." He stopped abruptly. Even he could sense it wasn't just a draft. Emily took a step forward, instinct pushing her toward her father despite her fear. "Dad, is that you?" she asked, her voice trembling but full of love. The coffin responded immediately to her call, a slight, sharp thud made everyone jump. The candles flickered more and more, casting dancing shadows that seemed to be approaching the congregation. An icy chill ran through the chapel. The air seemed to grow heavier, each breath more labored. Emily felt an invisible current brush against the back of her neck, as if someone were watching her. The tension rose to an unbearable pitch, guests slowly backed away, some mumbling prayers, others holding their heads, unable to look away. Then, a muffled but distinct noise sounded, coming directly from the coffin, an irregular, almost human breath. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she knew she had to stay close to her father. "I'm here, Dad. I won't leave you alone," she whispered. At that moment, something even more disturbing happened. A dark figure seemed to emerge from the shadow cast over the coffin, moving and blurred, as if an invisible presence were trying to manifest itself. The murmurs in the chapel turned into muffled screams. Everyone felt that the inexplicable had just crossed the boundary between the world of the living and that of the dead. Emily felt her heart pounding. She knew what they had just seen was only the beginning, and that something terrifying, would soon reveal its true nature. The uneven breathing coming from the coffin echoed through the chapel like an ominous drum. Guests backed away, some knocking over pews, others clutching their loved ones, unable to tear their eyes away from the object of their dread. The priest, now pale and trembling, murmured words of comfort, but his words rang hollow in the face of what they all saw. Emily, for her part, remained frozen. Her love for her father was stronger than her fear. She walked slowly towards the coffin, each step seeming to weigh a ton. Her hands were shaking, but she reached out to the cold wood. "Dad, please, talk to me." The coffin vibrated again, louder this time, and a sharp crack startled the entire chapel. Then, silence fell abruptly, heavy and oppressive. Everyone held their breath, searching the darkness for what had just moved. Then a new, sharper and more ominous noise emanated from the coffin, a scraping, as if something were trying to extricate itself from within. The whispers turned into muffled screams, and several guests hurried back. One collapsed on the floor, while another stumbled over a bench as he fled toward the exit. Emily felt a wave of terror pass through her, but she refused to move away. She knew it was her father, or at least what was left of him, trying to communicate. A faint voice, almost a whisper, reached her. "Emily, listen." The panicked priest tried to intervene, but his gaze betrayed the same fear as everyone else's. The shadows cast by the candles seemed to stretch, twist, and creep dangerously close to the chapel walls. The atmosphere had become almost tangible, saturated with terror and mystery. Emily felt an invisible force pull her toward the coffin, and she knew, deep down, that this moment marked the beginning of a revelation that would change everything they thought they knew about death, about her father, and about the bond that united them. Everyone held their breath, unable to look away, as a terrifying question hung in the air: what if the coffin opens, and what if what's inside refuses to remain silent? Everyone in the chapel stood frozen, their eyes fixed on the coffin. The heavy silence was suddenly broken by a muffled but distinct sound, a faint, strangled, almost human scream. The walls seemed to vibrate with the echo, and several guests covered their ears in panic. Emily felt her heart race. That scream, was that her father's voice? Impossible. And yet, she had distinctly heard that familiar sound, faint but unmistakable. She took a step back in horror, but the instinct of love made her move forward again. "Daddy, is that you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The guests huddled together in panic. Some sobbed, others murmured disordered prayers. Margaret fell to her knees, begging for divine protection. The priest, pale and trembling, raised his hand to the coffin, unable to utter a word. Then, another sharp movement shook the coffin. The hinges creaked under the invisible pressure, and an icy blast swept through the chapel, making all the candles flicker. Emily felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Then the unexpected happened: the coffin lid moved slightly, tilting as if pushed from within. The scream intensified, but it was no longer just a cry of fear, it was a plea, a desperate attempt to communicate. The guests backed away, frightened at the thought of what they were about to discover. Emily, her hands trembling, knelt beside the coffin. She knew that behind that scream was her father. But what she didn't know was what that scream truly meant: something more terrifying than she could ever have imagined had just awakened. All eyes in the chapel turned toward her. Everyone knew this moment would never be forgotten. And in the shadows, behind the flickering candlelight, something alive, or almost alive, seemed to be watching, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. The chapel was frozen in an almost palpable tension. The coffin lid was still shaking, and the short, uneven breaths of whatever was inside filled the room with an icy atmosphere. Emily, her hands still resting on the cold wood, felt an invisible force holding her back, as if something wanted her to discover the truth. The priest, terrified but aware that inaction would only worsen the situation, approached slowly. With trembling hesitation, he placed his hands on the lid and lifted it a little further. The guests took a step back, fear etched on their faces. And then, silence returned for a moment. Richard's body was motionless, peaceful, as if he were asleep. But something immediately caught everyone's attention. On his chest lay a small wooden box, finely engraved with ancient symbols that no one recognized. The air around it seemed to vibrate slightly, as if the box emitted its own energy. Emily knelt beside her father, fascinated and terrified at once. She carefully took the box, her trembling fingers brushing against the mysterious engravings. The entire chapel held its breath, watching the young woman's every move. "What is this?" someone in the congregation whispered. But no one dared come any closer. Even the priest seemed unable to utter a word, frozen by a fear he had never known before. Emily gently opened the box. Inside was a small, leather-bound notebook, looking old-fashioned, with words written in her father's unmistakable handwriting. But what shocked her most was the last page, a warning, written in Richard's handwriting, but dated to a time before his death. The words seemed to predict what had just happened, as if her father knew something inexplicable would awaken that day. The notebook vibrated slightly under her fingers, and Emily felt an invisible presence around her, heavy and oppressive. She knew, without understanding how, that what her father had left was not simply a message, it was a warning for her, for everyone present, and for what was to come. Emily opened the small notebook cautiously. The scent of old leather and parchment filled her nostrils, and each page seemed to vibrate slightly beneath her trembling fingers. She began to read, her eyes quickly scanning her father's familiar handwriting, but what she discovered left her speechless. The notebook chronicled ancient, occult research, rituals Richard had studied in secret. These rituals weren't meant to harm, they were designed to protect the Harper family, to create a bond between the living and those who had passed on. Every symbol engraved on the box, every word written in the notebook, had a specific meaning. Emily felt a shiver run through her body. Her father had anticipated her death, and he had prepared for this moment. The warning on the last page wasn't just a prediction, it was an instruction. Emily, if you're reading this, know that my death is not the end. The box contains the key. Protect it. Don't let anyone open it without understanding. Life and death are closer than we think. What you'll see today is just the beginning. Emily looked up, and the chapel seemed different, as if each shadow cast by the candles took on a new dimension, denser, more real. The coffin was shaking again, but this time the movement seemed almost intentional, like a silent communication. She understood that her father was trying to speak to her across the confines of death. And in that icy breath that ran through the chapel, Emily felt that what she had taken for fear was only the shadow of a much deeper and more disturbing truth. The bond between her father and herself had never been broken, and that bond could awaken forces that no human should face unprepared. As the guests held their breath, Emily knew she must understand her father's message, for every second she hesitated brought something unknown and dangerous closer. She turned another page in the notebook, ready to discover the extent of the mystery. Emily flipped through the pages of the notebook with a mixture of fascination and fear. Each line revealed that her father was not just an ordinary man, he had explored ancient rituals, seeking to protect his family from forces that ordinary mortals could not understand. She then read a clear and disturbing instruction. The box on my chest contains a link. It connects my mind to yours. If you listen, you will hear my voice. But be careful, what is beyond life can be dangerous. Do not break the seal unless necessary. At that moment, the coffin vibrated more forcefully, as if Richard's presence were trying to manifest itself directly. Emily felt an icy breath brush the back of her neck, and she whipped her head around. The guests had backed away, some whispering prayers, others frozen in terror. Then, a faint but distinct whisper was heard, "Emily, listen." The voice seemed to come from the coffin, but at the same time, it echoed in her head. She felt a strange force pushing her to lean closer, to touch the notebook and the box at the same time. The shadows cast by the candles danced irregularly, almost conscious. The walls of the chapel seemed to breathe. The guests murmured, some sobbing, others paralyzed with fear. All felt the invisible presence emanating from the coffin. Emily, despite her fear, understood that this moment was not a simple supernatural event, it was a message, an instruction left by her father to guide her in the face of a danger she did not yet understand. She opened the box a little further, revealing an ancient symbol engraved on the bottom, which pulsed like a silent heart. At that moment, she knew that what she was seeing was only the beginning. The forces her father had contained or channeled were now awakened. And everyone in the chapel felt that something invisible and powerful, was watching them, waiting for the moment to fully reveal itself. The icy blast intensified in the chapel. Candle flames flickered violently, casting twisted shadows on the walls. The coffin shook more and more violently, and this time the wood creaked ominously, as if something were actually trying to wriggle out of it. Emily, her hands resting on the box and notebook, felt a powerful force pull her lightly toward the coffin. She held back a scream, her eyes desperately searching the guests for support. But everyone seemed petrified, unable to move, as if the presence emanating from the coffin paralyzed their bodies and minds. Then, a clear whisper echoed directly into Emily's head, "Fear nothing, but listen to me." Her father's voice was distinct, yet ethereal, and each word sent shivers through her soul. She understood then that the ritual he had prepared was not only protective, it could keep her spirit between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Suddenly, the coffin lid opened slightly, enough to reveal a slight movement inside. The guests recoiled in panic, some falling to their knees. A dense, shifting shadow seemed to hover above the body, taking on an indistinct but frightening human form. It seemed to want to communicate, but its presence alone was enough to impose terror. Emily felt her hands grow clammy, but some inner force urged her to speak. "Daddy. I'm here. I'm listening." The box on her chest pulsed gently, like an invisible heart, and the blurred figure above the coffin seemed to respond, bowing slowly, as if to indicate that it meant no harm. The priest, trembling all over, murmured, It's supernatural." The guests, for their part, were suffocating with anguish and incomprehension. Everyone understood that what they had just experienced was not a simple phenomenon, it was a direct link between the world of the dead and the living, made possible by the ritual prepared by Richard Harper. Emily, despite her fear, knew that the hardest part was yet to come, understanding her father's full message, and protecting her family from what she had just awakened. The icy breath now filled the entire chapel. The candles flickered as if they would go out at any moment, casting shadows that seemed alive. The figure above the coffin, dense and moving, slowly cleared, revealing vague but familiar features. It was Richard, or at least a manifestation of his spirit. Emily, trembling but determined, leaned over the coffin and whispered, "Daddy, what should I do?" The ethereal voice echoed in her head again, "Listen, my daughter, what you have seen is only the beginning. The box contains a link between our worlds. It protects, but it can also awaken that which must remain dormant. You are now the guardian. Never break the seal without reason, and trust your heart." An eerie silence followed, then the figure seemed to gently bow, gradually disappearing in a blue glow. The coffin stabilized, becoming motionless again. The chapel returned to its normal atmosphere, but no one spoke, everyone was too shaken to breathe normally. Emily held the box against her, the notebook in her other hand, finally understanding the extent of her father's secret. His death had never been an end, it was a passage, a transfer of power and responsibility. The guests, still trembling, knew they had witnessed something inexplicable and that none of them would ever forget it. As she stood, Emily felt a strange peace wash over her. The bond with her father was intact, but the world around her had changed forever. She knew that from now on, she would be the one to protect this secret, a guardian between life and death, ready to face whatever the unseen might awaken. The chapel, silent and dark, still held a breath, as if something invisible, continued to watch over Emily and what she had just discovered. And in the young woman's heart, a new certainty: a father's love could cross the limits of death, but it was necessary to respect the mystery that accompanied it, or risk awakening the unimaginable.